What is going on? Why is everybody freaking out about jobs? Did it really warrant the firing of the head of the BLS? What is happening with the stock market? And why is Trump crashing out? All right, we got a lot to cover, but we're going to make this super simple, so let's get started. First things first, we have Ted Lieu, a member of Congress, tweet out the worst economic jobs report since the end of the pandemic. Quite a scary and bold headline to make. What is he talking about? What economic jobs report, and why does this matter? He's talking about a job report released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS for short. This jobs report they call the Employment Situation Summary. And this is the report that Ted Lieu is referring to. The worst report since the pandemic. But why do we even care about jobs in the first place? Why does it cause this massive fallout across social media? Republicans, Democrats, it doesn't matter. Everybody's on board. This was a bad report. Why is it making Trump absolutely crash out and lose his mind? Well, here's why. So the unemployment rate shows us how many people are unemployed out of the workforce. And when people are unemployed, they are very sad. When people don't have jobs, they don't have money. And when people don't have money, they aren't able to buy and purchase products or services from businesses. When businesses can't sell their products or services, it's reflected in their top or bottom line, and that results in bad earnings. With bad earnings, stock market goes to poo-poo. So no matter what amount of wealth you have, whether you're wealthy and you have a ton of assets, those assets are going to depreciate in a recession. Whether you're poor, whether you're middle class, whether you're upper class, job growth is going to slow, and most likely, some people, either directly near you or maybe even you yourself, are going to be impacted in some way or another. So no matter what, recessions are never good for anybody. Nobody likes recessions. And jobs are a good indication of recessions that might be on the horizon. And as you can see by these gray bars that indicate recessions, most of the time they coordinate with this spike in unemployment rate, which is clearly visible. So we talked about why jobs are important and serve as a good key economic metric to predict what might be coming in the future. This is what the jobs report looks like over the past about 5 years. As you can see, there's a pretty stark downtrend going on here since the end of the pandemic. And this steady decline could be for various reasons. Maybe businesses are afraid to hire because they don't know the potential impact coming with tariffs. Maybe immigrants are unemployed right now because they're afraid to get deported. Or maybe AI is just simply taking a lot of jobs. But regardless, there could be a ton of reasons that this has been on the decline for some time now. And when this jobs report starts to go negative, as we talked about, the unemployment rate starts to go up, and we don't like that. Nobody does. But that still doesn't answer the question, why was everybody freaking out so much, particularly about this report? We'll get to May and June in a second, but let's just talk about the July numbers, the numbers that just came out yesterday. We were expecting somewhere between 115,000 jobs. We ended up getting 73,000. So, that's a pretty significant miss. But that's actually not what caused this crazy reaction across the market. Actually, it's this. Now, as you can see on the left, we have some really big numbers compared to some really small numbers in the solid color. These numbers actually are revisions. Wow, what does that mean, revisions? These reports, when initially reported, were 144,000, 147,000, and were revised down in this July report about 200 some odd thousand jobs. Now, that is an absurd revision. We're going to get into what actually caused these revisions because that's very important to understand in a second. But let's see what Trump had to say about this. Well, okay, let's see. Donald J. Trump. In my opinion, today's jobs numbers were rigged in order to make the Republicans and me look bad. And he also references this massively downward revision that happened shortly after he got into office of about 818,000 jobs. And that's really his evidence for calling it a complete scam and justifying the firing of the BLS commissioner. Subscribe if you feel for Erica, by the way. Well, what's ironic about that actually is Erica, the commissioner of the BLS that was fired by Trump, was voted in by J.D. Vance, who is now the vice president, and Mark Rubio, who is the Secretary of State. Two people very close with Trump and presumably on his side. But does Trump have a point in this? Because this is a little suspicious, right? How are jobs dropping nearly 250,000 combined over 2 months? That's steep. And as he referenced in his Truth Social post, there was a revision down of over 850,000. So what's going on here? How are there revisions that are this significant? And what could be the cause of that? Is it being rigged, or is it simply a consequence of how the BLS operates? Let's take a look. This right here is the BLS report for July 2025. And the two sections you should have interest in are the household data and establishment data. Now, the BLS uses a variety of methods to actually collect and summarize this data. Two of those ways they obtain the data are through online surveys, and another one, human-to-human phone calls. All right, that's interesting. So you tell me. We have Jimmy here. Jimmy actually just got laid off from his job, so he's not feeling too good. He's a little down in the dumps. He doesn't really want to talk to anybody. He was using ChatGPT too much, so they thought it was time to let him go. On the other hand, we have Veronica. Veronica's actually in a pretty secure spot. She just got a promotion. She's feeling good. Her manager reassured her she will be employed, so she's happily employed. She's feeling good. Now you tell me, do you think Jimmy is going to be more willing to pick up a phone call from the BLS asking about his status of employment, or Veronica? Now, I would lean the way of saying that people who are feeling more secure about their job, maybe just got a promotion, maybe just got hired, maybe receiving some sort of confirmation from their manager that things are going well. Whatever that indication may be, I would assume that she would be a lot more likely to talk about her employment situation than our good friend Jimmy over here. Jimmy probably doesn't want to talk to anybody about his employment right now. Why not just skip the call, and maybe you'll feel a little bit better about it after a month or so. The same exact concept goes for businesses as well. If you're Nvidia, who's growing and continuing to sell chips at a ridiculous rate, you're going to feel a little more secure about hiring new people and therefore reporting new hiring than a small business that's grinding just to make ends meet. So I think you could begin to picture why this data varies so much and why revisions can be so massive. We can see for this last report as of July 2025, the initial estimate came out August 1st. The first revision comes out a month later, second revision 2 months later, and the final revision comes in February 2026. As this data starts to come in, you can form a more complete picture, but to assume that this jobs data is very accurate, especially the initial estimate, I'd say is a bit of a stretch based on some of the things we just talked about. So I guess the overall point is like, yeah, the data is bad and the data is volatile. Does that really warrant the firing of the commissioner of the BLS, who is a statistician, who is simply reporting data as you requested? Probably not. And that's exactly what Democrats and Republicans alike have agreed upon. Now, I'm not even going to go through what the Democrats have to say because obviously they're going to take a jab at Trump here. Here's just 3 instances of individuals in Trump's party discussing how the firing was probably unwarranted. It's not the statistician's fault if the numbers are accurate. Kind of impetuous, in other words, without much thought, and impulsive. We have to look for objective statistics somewhere. If you just fire people when they report, then it's going to make it much harder to stay true, right? You'll probably have some fear for your job security if you report bad numbers. You can't really make numbers different or better by firing people counting the numbers. If she was just fired because the president, whoever decided to fire the director just because they didn't like the numbers, they ought to just grow up. Now, keep in mind, these are people literally within Trump's party. And while we're on the topic of just firing people because they reported bad numbers, this isn't unusual to have massive downward revisions. As we can see with this article, Erica over the past few years has completely overestimated jobs on a number of occasions. And you would think that's actually going against what Trump's assumption is, right? Because if you're overly optimistic, then you're probably trying to make the president look a little bit better than he actually is. But nonetheless, people really start to get riled up and worried once we see this number nearing 0. So to revise from a relatively strong job market of 144 and 147 down to almost negative in May and June, that is quite scary. You know, even though the top line number for July wasn't even terrible, that's actually not the concern. The concern is where the job growth is actually coming from in these reports. Here's a distribution of where the gains came from, and you can see number one at the top, we have healthcare and social assistance. So thank God the old people in America are driving job growth, because if we didn't, things would be looking a little squirrely right now. The growth certainly isn't happening in the tech space. That's typically the driver of, technological innovation, making our lives easier and potentially more productive. That industry is getting hit rather hard, especially in the month of July. So at the end of the day, should we be worried? Well, we talked about why jobs are such an important economic indicator and forecast the economy very well. We talked about how jobs data is collected and why that process can be rather faulty. And we also looked at where job growth is actually coming from, although the job growth is small. I think it's definitely not a good thing to just have an older population driving job growth instead of tech companies creating more productive and efficient products and needing to hire more talented individuals. Relying on social services and healthcare to drive economic growth typically isn't the best formula. And it's just never great to see the president crashing out and firing someone that was simply just reporting statistics, which she was hired to do and was voted in by VP Vance and Secretary of State Mark Rubio. So yeah, I'd say we're in quite the precarious situation, I guess, pickle, if you will. And so I'm interested, what do you think? Is the Republican Party falling apart right in front of our eyes? Is this jobs report just a glimpse or a hint of what's to come? Are we just a few reports away from that job growth sinking to negative? I hope this was helpful and simplifies things a little bit, because I know it can get a little complicated, and a lot of the times we don't even know where data is coming from and how it's collected, so I thought that would be useful to know. All right, well, that's it for me, so I'll see you in the next one. Peace.